Canada.
Ah, okay.
So, and Canada's not very happy about
And being
these
there.
folk.
Yeah.
But they're being represented by a former Vietnam vet who also went AWL and ended up in Canada, lawyer. So I didn't get his name, but.
Yeah, I heard that number before. I heard the 8,000 were.
All right, I'm gonna be a director now.
Okay, we're ready.
We're gonna start. So we're starting
Warmed up.
part 4 of the oral history.
Time flies
This is
when
the
you're-
4th one, and today we have, of course, Jim here. We have Jen. We
Gotta go all the way
have
around.
Jeff, and then we have Joe,
Hey, wow, cool.
and then we have the
wall.
clock that's across on the wall.
And it's almost right.
That's almost right. And so last time we left off, basically we went through most of the 60s. And talking to Jim in the interim, Jim said he wanted to go back, do a little flashback episode. There were some things that he remembered that he wanted to talk about, theological changes and development from the 60s. So we'll start with that and then see where we go.
Alrighty, one of the things that I don't know, it got said by me or somebody else did, but on the UCF situation, all of us who were hired in 62 or 63.
Yeah, hold on a second, Jim. Hey, sorry, Jim, carry on.
All of
That's
us
your
who were hired come to the U of I in 62 or 63 were hired primarily for the United Christian Fellowship agenda. And there were 13 of us who were hired for that. And
All campus ministers?
yeah. And that agenda was to, the language of that day was to develop a plan for the organic union was the language, of 5 campus ministries. And it was based on a faith and order paradigm. And what that means is that you order your institutional life by your faith. And it's assumed that everybody who's involved in faith and order has the same faith. And we all assumed that. Unfortunately, it proved not to be correct. That is, we did not all have the same faith. But that was an interesting paradigm to be working with. As a part of that, IDF had bought a piece of property over on California where the museum is now. And we call that place Page House, named after Mr. Page, who started IDF, or the forerunner of IDF back in the 1800s. And it was set up as on a program basis of what was called life and work. And it was made up of, it was to be a men's housing cooperative. And the original idea was that everybody who would live in that house would be coming out of some disciple congregation somewhere in the United States. And that it would seek to understand the Christian perspective in terms of the actual life and work of students as they were involved in that life and work here.
Now, what year was that was bought?
62 probably. It was already in.
So before you got here?
Yes, yeah. And
So the building's just kind of getting wrapped up here, and another building's being bought already.
yeah, it was a house of a former dean, and he had died, and his family was trying to get rid of it. So we bought it, I think, for like, as I remember, like $50,000, something like that, which we didn't have, but we bought it anyway. So, and those two paradigms, the faith and order paradigm and the life and work paradigm, just simply don't go together. Faith and order is more of a head-tripping kind of thing with manipulation of organizational structures. And the life and work is more interested in engaging some of the problems or issues that human beings have as they confront them. Well, the interesting thing about Page House was we got it going in August of '64, and the Vietnam War was coming on, and so that became the thing that the members of Page House wrestled with. They wrestled with some other things.
How many students were living there?
I think it started out with 8 people, and then it expanded to 14 or 15, something like that. Another issue that it dealt with along the way was sexuality issues, particularly as the university began to co-edify, as it said, all of its living spaces. And in order to be an approved housing unit for students, we had to co-edify. And that created a big debate, especially between the foundation and the outfit next door. It did help us get rid of all the conservatives who were on the foundation board. There weren't very many left, but in fact there was only one, Sam Redlin. And when the vote was taken, Sam was the only no vote on the board, and he just got up and left, very angry.
Just upset about it being co-ed.
Yes. I'm sure there were other things related to that, but that was the objective comment that he made to me later out in the parking lot.
I don't want to throw you off order, Jim, but I want to make sure you follow up on the statement you said about the UCF. Not everybody shared the same faith. What did you mean by that? Because everybody was nominally a Protestant, correct?
Yeah, they were all Protestants of some variety or the other. Well, the debate as it developed inside UCF, if I can remember the language, there was a number of slogans we used. One was, "We will do nothing separately that we can't do together." And another one was, we will do everything together that we can't do separately.
Whoa. Sounds like a quote from Chairman Mao.
Yeah, I was gonna say you had this like in big characters on the wall when you came in.
And these two slogans were, there was a lot of emotion in those slogans.
And do we mean the individual campus ministers, or we mean the campus ministries, or the?
No, these were the things that the institutions had voted on. In the first one, we will not do anything separately that we can't do together. Was the one that all the institutions voted on. But I was telling you last time that there was a division between the folk who were directors, like Ben Garrison at Wesley Church, who was also, simply by being the pastor of Wesley Church, he was also the director of the foundation, and the staff of Wesley Foundation, as opposed to the staff of Wesley Church. And that was true of McKinley, that was true of UCC's, that was true of the Baptists, that was true here.
Was that an age thing, or was it just a?
I think it was a power thing. It was basically the pastors of the congregation that I think dreamed up the idea of UCF to begin with. Why, I can't say. And then they hired staff to do their bidding, basically is what it was. Well, staff, I guess we were an honorary group because we just weren't going to do that. So we concocted this other motto about we will only do together what we can't do separately.
So that was a contradictory slogan. That was
Right, so those were the two counter things that were going. Anyway, it played out for me in the difference between the faith and order paradigm and the Page House paradigm. Page House was functioning as a part of UCF, and because the men were wrestling with the draft question, there was a lot of counseling going on in Page House. And some bought it and some didn't. But Uniplace certainly didn't like the fact that that was going on.
Draft counseling.
And I'm sure that was true over at Wesley, at McKinley, and the UCCs, and the American Baptist. I'm pretty sure that that's the case because the conflict began to settle down in the sense of knowing who was on what side between the pastors and the underlings.
And there was a UCF house as well, right?
Yeah, there were, each one of the outfits had their own house, so all houses came under UCF.
But weren't we talking last time that there was a UCF house at Pennsylvania and Lincoln?
Yes, but it wasn't a housing unit.
Okay, but it was an office space then,
Yeah.
and gathering space.
Yeah, and it had a small chapel element.
But like the Presbyterians have the Presby House thing, which they're
Right.
expanding now.
And Wesley had 2 houses.
So everybody basically had some kind of housing thing for their
Right,
students.
right. So that was a conflict over the agenda of UCF, or a developing conflict. And I don't know if I made that clear at the last session.
Well, it comes across, and maybe I'm putting my own reading on this, but it comes across as the difference between actually doing the work on a day-to-day basis and having this faith level thing which doesn't necessarily connect with the work.
Well, but it has worked too. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
going to bring 5 separate institutions together with all of their collateral holdings like congregations, that requires a lot of work. And it's harder work at the beginning than the life and work stuff is. Because the life and work is pretty much focused on what is hurting
Well, you're dealing with
somebody.
issues, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I meant, but
Mhm.
that there's a difference between dealing with issues that the life and work paradigm seem to have, and the issue of the faith and order, which is about structure, which is about organizing.
Mhm. And I think that was more of a pastoral hurt. So one way of analyzing that conflict would be to look what were the hurts of the pastors as opposed to the hurts of the underlings, and see where those come into conflict. It still goes on, and you see it in the language that churches use or congregations use to designate their staff between senior pastor and associate pastor or assistant pastor or something like that. And there's always tension between those 2 groups because it's a power struggle. Well, out of that, out of the Page House thing, there was more than one, but there was one that sticks in my mind. One of the things that developed as the war went on was places to have discussions and do strategy work. And Ada Mae Adams, who was a member of Uniplace, but who had been on the board at some point, foundation board at some time in her life, and who was anti-war, opened up her apartment over at Buena Vista Court. I think I've told you all of that story too.
I don't know.
It's the place where Bob Neiman lived for a while.
Where Maria still lives, yeah.
Maria lives there. So we would hold our meetings over in her house. And her nephew was living in Page House. And he thought all of this was just terrible. He did not like the fact that his grandmother was involved in these activities when he wanted to be a Marine. And sure enough, when he graduated, he joined the Marines. Despite my effort to talk him out of that. But he was in love with the uniform. And I think that was the primary reason he joined the Marines.
For the uniform?
It was the uniform. And maybe some of the propaganda that goes with the uniform. And somewhere toward the end of the 60s, he showed up in the office one afternoon and we got to talking. And, he was really disturbed by his experience, although he never told me what that experience was. He wanted
his military experience.
Yeah, his military experience. He wanted to know if I would help him raise money, so, and he did tell me what that was. He wanted to raise money to help build an orphanage in Vietnam. He had become a Roman Catholic after he left here. And this was a Roman Catholic project, and so he felt like he had to participate in it. And for a couple of years, he worked on raising the money, and he finally raised $1 million, and got it sent off for that project. And the night that he got it sent off, he committed suicide. Well, that hit like a, I don't know, I can't really explain. It was a deep hurt for me, as well as for Ada Mae Adams and the whole family. Well, in '68, we had early in the year the assassination of King, later Robert Kennedy, and I'll tell you the story about Leo Pfeiffer, the Roman Catholic priest who was from Recife, Brazil, and the policeman who was killed and honored in Indianapolis. He was the chief of police, and he had been the one who had tortured the nuns that Leo had seen. And that also was the year when UCF evaluated itself on its progress towards towards organic union, and the Baptist or the University Baptist outfit pulled out at that point on the basis that they no longer believed in that. So that was one place where the faith was not together. So they would not be able to participate in the ordering of that. That was an honest statement. Everybody else voted, yeah, we want to continue, which was not an honest statement, because we had already had 4 years of 5 years of experience that was not the case. So the reason for being here, my primary reason for being here, was no longer valid. So that brings me to the what I saw at that time as a theological crisis. Looking back on it now, it was penny-ante stuff. But at that point, well, in the 50s, I had gotten in pretty deep into religious stuff. And so all of this together blew that away, so to speak. So I had to begin to reconfigure my life. Shared that with Dolores. Dolores thought she didn't want to hear that. Ugh, this was bad news. She'd been working at the library for 3 or 4 years, and she knew that kind of statement usually meant, oops, a move. And she wasn't interested in moving. So that began to work its way with me, that crisis. So I had to return to what I considered to be my origins, which was back to that good confession back in the 40s.
What was the roots of the crisis? It was the UCF stuff?
All those things together,
Everything
the
together.
convergence of all those failures, which blew away the religious paradigm.
But you
Yeah,
were also
it
having
could
major
be.
victories at this point. I mean, there were lots of students working, things were happening.
Yeah, that's true. But when your worldview gets smashed, those things don't matter very much.
I mean, in many ways, it follows on from your original crisis with
Yes.
Hiroshima, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, this is just an additional
So just another
layer
one.
of things that challenge the worldview, that challenge the way the world was supposed to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, one thing, obviously, the story you just told about the Marine, right? You know, here's someone who you knew personally, who you'd struggled with about being in the military in the first place, comes back from military service, obviously troubled but not telling very much except wanting to raise this money, and then does this great
Right.
effort and commits suicide. I mean, that's a challenging thing to go through.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
And one of the, it lays a guilt trip on me, because I
You
was
weren't-
thinking.
didn't succeed.
Yeah, I didn't see this.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand the depth of the dilemma he found himself in. So there were reasons for, that is, I think there were valid reasons for doubting myself, is what that comes down to. So I returned to what I considered my origins, and which, is the good confession that disciples go through. And what I discovered in that was, okay, you go forward in the church, in a congregation, to make this good confession. The preacher asks you, do you believe in Jesus Christ? Do you accept him as your Lord and Savior? Now, on the one hand, that looks like a question that requires a subjective answer. That is, do you, me, believe? Well, the first time that was asked me, I didn't believe. It definitely came off as a shock. So I got to thinking about that. And what I decided was that the statement is really about, not about what I believe, but about the object that I'm supposed to say I believe in. That is, it was really a statement about, as I retranslated it, and I was reading some liberation theology at that point, was that it was about Jesus of Nazareth as a liberator. And that my freedom is somehow hooked in with his liberation. So I began to work out of that format. So that gets me to the 70s, I guess. We can pause and have a drink.
So this reformulation for you then allowed you to kind of start again.
Yeah.
Or to kind of get past these crises or these things that had challenged everything that came before and start making sense of it.
Yeah, I was moving out of the religious paradigm into another one.
Now, were any of the other UCF people going through similar crises with similar conclusions, or not?
Well, there were certainly going through crises. As I said, Larry Hill, Jim Ray, Nancy Stagg were all fired from McKinley for some of the same sorts of things that we were all doing. Heat was beginning to develop, I think, in all of that is, conflict was beginning to develop in all of the units of UCF. The only time that I can say that it surfaced with all of us present was we had a UCF retreat up, I forget the name of the place, it's north of here. And we spent 2 days up there. And this seemed to be the whole point of the retreat. And shortly thereafter, the person that had been hired as the director of UCF resigned and left, as far as I know, without ever giving a reason for it. My reading of his resignation was that he too saw that there was no future for UCF as an organic union, and he went on to another spot.
Now, was the war still going on at this point?
Oh, yeah.
As this was breaking up?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, that not just IDF, but the whole UCF got involved in all the protests, the civil rights, and then merging into the anti-war stuff. And after a certain amount of years, the parent institutions kind of said, this is not what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
and started firing people, and then the people on the ground who are doing this stuff are starting to see this and having changes as well,
Right.
being affected by all the stuff that's happening.
Yeah. And the reason that could happen, except here, I think I would have been fired too, was that the relationship in these other places was so tight between the foundations and the congregations that the congregation could make that determination. Here it could not. By a fluke, when Jack Jarman left, before Ray Miller was hired, they brought this guy in to be interviewed. He was a high-powered disciple, and they had promised him the moon, I guess. And so as we wandered around in the foundation building, he paused to ask me, well, he didn't ask me, he said, "I understand that I will be the director of the foundation." And I said, "No, I'm the executive director." And he turned to the search committee chair and said, "He tells me he's the executive director of the foundation." And Joe Daly said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, there's nothing more to talk about," and left.
Wow.
So by that kind of a fluke, that relationship between the church and the foundation became clear. There was a definite line that the congregation couldn't step over.
And this has got to have added to your, that whole process that you're going through now, because everybody else is getting fired left and right and so on. And you're, because of your particular situation, you are protected in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so.
In some way, that's for
yeah,
sure.
right. And so this has got to put you,
Mm-hmm.
even more of a sense of, okay, now what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
With this situation.
Well, one of the-
besides dealing with Dolores is not wanting to move too.
Well, another way it showed up was that once it became clear to everybody, to all of the hired hands, that we were arrestable. We had our own little private meeting over at Joe Peacock's house, in which the question was, if we get arrested, how do we finance our defense? Because none of the institutions had any money for that. So we all pledged that we'd give $5,000 for whoever got arrested. So we were coming together as this small group of folk who weren't in power to protect one another as best we could. Well, the 1970s was the spot that I left out of the speech, or the activist forum. So I brought my notes along for that, and I'll just look at this from time to time to see if I'm on target. One of the things that was going on in 1971 was, well, it had been going on since 74 or 64, and that was a population attitude change towards the government, U.S. government. In 64, the population was, by a Harris poll, showed that 67% of the population favored the war. But in 71, Harris poll showed that 61% of the population were opposed to the war on moral grounds. And that was due to a lot of stuff that had been going on in the 60s. And that began to have an impact locally, because this community as a whole was very much for the war. That is the whole Champaign County. So that made life miserable for everybody who was opposed to the war, which was mostly left-wing students, faculty, and UCF staff people. The 72 election was a crisis point. All of of us had been working for McGovern. I was wearing McGovern buttons and was going around neighborhoods distributing leaflets, etc. And the congregation was aware of all of this. So Joe Bryan, who was a member of the UCS, or the church staff, came in the day after the election and papered my office with black crepe paper all around the place, and also around all the photographs and paintings that were on the wall, and left. So I didn't know who did it.
What was the symbolism of that?
Mourning.
Morning, oh, okay.
Mourning the defeat.
Oh, got it.
So I just left the door open and was sitting in my office doing whatever I was doing. And one of the women of the congregation, who was considered a pillar of Maryland Hill, happened to come zooming by the hallway. She looked in the door as she went by. She glimpsed the black crepe, took 2 or 3 steps further, stopped, came back, and she says, "That's the trouble with you Democrats, you're poor losers." And on she went. But that circulated in the congregation that Holiman was mourning the defeat of McGovern. So the pressure was still there, and building. But that gives you some idea maybe of how that was working out on us. Well, as UCF was going through its swaying collapse, it became more and more obvious that we're going to have to do something different. Fred Hilpert was the moderator of the board. Fred had been a Marine and fought in Vietnam. Had come out, he and his wife had gone on, they got married and they went on their honeymoon, and they were camping out somewhere in the national park in Wyoming. And they pitched their tent, and some drunks came zapping through and knocked over the tent. Fred was asleep when that tent collapsed, and so he ended up killing all 3 guys, because he woke up and he thought he was still in Vietnam. Well, he wasn't arrested. Well, he was arrested, but he wasn't charged. And he moved here. He was a journalist and worked in the communications department and became moderator of the foundation board. So Fred began to organize the board, talking to board members, saying, this is something that we've got to deal with because we're catching this stuff, and we're losing money. We were losing money. Finances were, people stopped giving.
Because of the anti-war position?
For all sorts of things,
Yeah, okay.
but that was the main reason given. So, gradually the idea of a neighborhood service ministry developed. I promoted that by beginning to lift up the vision of an oikoumene and using that symbol, that the foundation's mission was not to conserve something, but to build something new that would be global and that would seek to be in solidarity with all human beings everywhere, regardless of what their faith position was. And that the way to do that was to carve out a parish, 7 square blocks around this building would become our people. So we got to the Jane Addams Social Work School, which was still here at that time, and talked them into doing a neighborhood service profile, which they did. Took them a year to do it. And what it showed was that about 10% of the population in 7 square blocks were retired people living on a fixed income. About 10% were minority folk, and the rest were graduate students. None of the buildings you see around here now were here at that time. They were just old houses that had been turned into apartments. So the next step then was to visit all of the neighbors and find out what they thought the neighborhood needed. Jane Adams was willing to put together a questionnaire for us.
And this was 73, 74, or is it later?
71, 72,
I was gonna say 72.
73.
So only 10% were minorities?
Mhm. Which was large at that time.
Right.
Black folk were not allowed across University Avenue, south of University Avenue.
How did you come up with the 7-block radius thing? Just out of curiosity.
I expect my old gambling days did that.
Okay. I thought it had to do with parish lines or whatever.
It got expanded as time went on, but that was the beginning point. 7 sounds like a good number to me. So we did that. That took another year. And the number one priority was crime prevention. There were a number of murders, lots of rapes and burglaries in the neighborhood at that time. The second one was emergency transportation for people who needed to go to the hospital or to a pharmacy or to the Social Security office or the unemployment office or whatever. There was no mass transit at that time. And there were cabs, but they charged an awful lot. And our low-income people just didn't have the money for that.
Yeah, that's because we moved here in '72, and at that point, you had the bus service from Orchard Downs to campus, basically. That was pretty much it.
Yep.
And to get our kids to school, we, I think they did have school buses out of Orchard Downs, but most of the time we drove them up to King's School, because they're going to King's School. And it was, I'm just thinking about that time to now, in terms of transportation, it was totally, you know, you just, if you didn't have a car, you were pretty much sunk.
Yeah, it's not,
Or you walked.
like Dorothy Wilcoxon was, she liked to come to church at that time on Sundays, and the cab, it was a $10 round trip, you know, and it's only like 6 blocks. Then the third one was an alternative food supply system. So first thing we did, we had the money because we by that time we'd sold Page House.
When did that happen? Early 70s, the Page House thing?
Yeah, probably 73.
It just got to be too much of a hassle, or?
Repair work, once everything got co-edified, it was going to mean a major revamping of the building, and it was going to be very expensive. So we waited about a year. We voted to co-edify, and we ran it 1 year, but the expenses were getting out of hand, so we sold it. We got $65,000 out of it. And so the first thing we did on the neighborhood service thing was buy a van for the emergency service. And we started publicizing that, and people began to use it. And the van was moving all over the county. We were going through a set of tires every 6-7 months. So it was getting a lot of use.
So I have a question at this point. So anti-war stuff is still going on, but there's partially a shift from doing international type stuff to doing local work here, and were a lot of the students that IDF and UCF worked with following that?
But,
They were still doing anti-war work, but then also doing neighborhood services stuff.
yeah, but that's not the only, neighborhood service was not the only thing we were doing.
Okay.
Second thing was to get the police on board in terms of actually monitoring this neighborhood. And they didn't want to do that. So there was a person from England here, and Neighborhood Watch was a program that was, or Whistle Stop was the name of the program in London. So he told us about it, and so we communicated with London and got the whistles and developed a Whistle Stop program. And that meant going to all the homes, everybody in the neighborhood, and selling a whistle. It's $1. And working out the process so that if anybody got in trouble, they'd blow their whistle, and the whole neighborhood would come to their help, to their defense. Burnham Hospital, which was just up the street at that time, was a major influence in helping get the police on board. So the police finally came on board, and that need was met. The alternative food supply system was the last thing, and Marvin Jones, who was from Michigan, and whose job was to help organize co-ops all over the Midwest, stopped in and sold us on the idea of a food cooperative.
The Strawberry Fields was already around at that point, right?
Yeah, but it was a for-profit outfit.
But it started off as a co-op.
Yes, but it was a for-profit co-op. Plus,
And that's because that was just,
There was a
that
house
was,
behind Uni High
Yeah.
School.
yeah, that was really
Right.
close.
Yeah.
So I'm just, so even though it became for-profit, so people saw that there was a need to have something different than what
Yeah.
was something that was only a couple blocks
Yeah.
away, right?
yeah, and by this time that we got the co-op going, which was 77, the van had been making headroad into the black community. So a lot of black folk were using the van, and they were very much in favor of a food co-op, especially one that sold soul food.
No, it wasn't in the building at that point, was it?
Yeah.
It was in the building,
Yeah,
okay.
it's always downstairs.
Okay, because that,
So you get rid of
I
the
was
pool tables.
confusing. Yeah, because there was a, kind of a food co-op set up at Orchard Downs where they
Yeah, there
used-
was a food co-op out there.
Yeah, they had one of the apartments was used, and they would bring in food once in a while, and then people would just go there and purchase their
Right, right.
goods and stuff.
Yeah, there was a co-op
Yeah.
out there.
But there was also, besides Strawberry Fields, I mean, there was that whole earthworks thing that was going on, right? There was like the garage, there was kind of these,
Yes,
the progressive,
Alternative institutions.
institutions were happening in town.
so
Totally
that
different
meant
place.
we got the thing started with $75. Marvin and I went down to St. Louis and bought the first bunch of food from the warehouse.
So what'd you do with the pool tables?
They were there, that's
Oh.
where we put the food. And we made, I think, $125, so we had $125 the next week to go buy, so it gradually developed.
What kind of stuff were you buying?
Hmm?
What kind of stuff were you buying?
Food.
Basic stuff, cabbage, lettuce,
Why'd you have to go to St. Louis to buy it?
produce mostly, because that was the only place we knew at that time to get
Okay.
it. There was a place developing at Terre Haute, but their prices were a little bit more than St. Louis. And St. Louis, there were just a whole lot of warehouses that had this big sale on the week, on Friday. And you'd go down on Friday and you'd just go by and pick up stuff and throw it in a bag and then go ahead.
So we're using the van to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So at this point, we're talking about 1977, you know, what you had in town, you had IGA out at Sunnycrest. You had the Jewel, I think, was already on Green Street down that
It
way,
was
right?
a Kroger at that time.
The Kroger.
About
yeah.
Diana's.
Diana's, Lincoln
Eisner's.
Square, Eisner's. Oh wow, I forgot about Eisner's. So basically, you had all of these, you know, corporate model kinds of things in
Mhm.
town, and so.
And then
this-
Strawberry Fields, which is just
Yeah,
up to.
but Strawberry Fields. Whenever I think of Strawberry Fields, I think because my daughter used to hang out at Strawberry Fields all the time. And that was basically for the high school kids or the alternative people in town who just went
There
there.
was a house.
It was a house, and they
Wow.
basically
And
just
you walked
sold
into
stuff
like
out of
the
this
living
house.
room. I mean, it was just. It
And they had
was,
a downstairs area and stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It was just.
So I just want to
rural
get that
Beckman area.
context, because
Right.
you're in the midst of all of these places that were selling groceries and stuff, you're setting up this
And we had this
alternative
group
spot.
of people who said they needed an alternative food supply. There was also a Chinese
Oh, the
store
Formosa.
up on University
Yeah,
and 4th Street.
University of Fourth, that we used to go there all the time because
Mhm.
that, we're going out for the Asian
Mhm.
stuff all the
Right,
time.
right.
For these corporate grocery stores, though, they were all more on the outs. I mean, if you're in campus, like where we are right now, I mean, they would be a distance if you didn't have
Lincoln Square.
transportation.
Yeah, Lincoln Square,
Just still far enough.
But I mean, like if you lived in this area and you didn't have transportation,
yeah.
I mean,
The IGA was
your
on.
closest would be
The
Strawberry
IGA was
Fields.
on there was an IGA on Kirby,
That's
then
kinda far.
with Sunnycrest
Well,
and stuff.
Closest IGA was on
Where Strawberry Fields is now. Where Strawberry Fields is now.
Yeah,
Now it's
right.
called Richards.
That's
I think
right.
it was.
So I mean, there really wasn't anything outside of like Strawberry Fields that was really within walking distance. If you
Yeah,
had transportation.
yeah. Well, particularly if you're dealing with, well, the North End folks, right? If, there's really no place for them, that was in a reasonable distance, so.
Well, the theory was also, that not only was it trying to address the needs of the 7 square block area, but we were beginning to reach out further. And so the idea of an alternative was that if it really worked, it would draw people from all over if it really worked. It would be an alternative to IGA.
Okay.
And if it really, really worked, it would put IGA out of business. So we had, we started leafleting the neighborhood, and at the end of our first purchases were late August, and by the end of September, we had over 1,000 members. There were people who would go every Friday morning out to all of the corporate grocery stores and find out what they were selling as their bargains. And then we would make sure that those same items were undercut them.
So Jim, who were some of the people? Some of the early co-opers?
Some of the early ones. Me, Jones, Marvin Jones, Inez Curtis, Clyde Smith and Ann Smith, Glenn Whitmer, Jennifer and Mary Ann Crafts, Claire Zook, Melvina Ropel, Esther Ewald, a bunch of students whose names I don't remember.
A lot of those people were board members. Or at least
Some of them were.
Some
Yeah,
of them.
some of them were.
Well, wasn't the co-op initially run for 5 years as a test by
Yeah.
mainly the IDF board and
Yeah,
staff?
right. Inez Curtis, me, Glenn Whitmer, Jennifer Kraft, and Mary Ann Kraft, those 5. Yeah, the deal was we'd run it 5 years ourselves, and after the 5 years were over, we would each step out and let somebody else take the call.
And so you had to buy coolers and stuff like that at that point.
Well, we didn't buy them. What we did was we would wait till the end of the year, and students left, they would throw out the refrigerators that they had in their rooms, and we would collect them. And we had a whole bunch of those.
Like the mini ones?
Little box ones.
And we would stack them up. So we had refrigeration, but it wasn't very great. But it was free.
Not to detract from this stuff, but you said there were other things going on besides the neighborhood service ministry. So
Right.
what else was going on?
Okay, one of the things,
We're basically talking mid-70s now or so, right?
well, one of the things that I picked up on was the fact that we were losing a lot of contributions from churches throughout the state. the region was trying to get something going for youth ministry. So Terry Holiman came up with the idea of let's do with Missouri.
Wait, Terry, who's on the board now?
Terry
Yeah.
Holiman, yes.
Huh.
You know, they have a long.
I didn't know that.
An international affairs
I'd
program.
like to see you two guys together. There's got to be a lot of interesting discussion there.
So, and Terry asked me at one point if I would be an adult chaperone.
Huh. I thought just that
I
the
said
period was after the word adult.
Yeah.
And Jim says no.
So now these were 2-week programs, or about 2-week programs. They were always in the spring. They were open to high school juniors and seniors who were willing to write a term paper on whatever global issue the international community were wrestling with and the United States Congress had to deal with. And first year that I went, there were 90-some people, 90-some kids who went. We'd spend a week in New York City working with United Nations folk. We'd spend a week in Washington, D.C. working with politicians there. Terry was into developing simulation games for whatever issue we were going to deal with. And he was really good at it.
Like the UN, like model UN code?
No, these were his own simulations that he concocted. But yes, it would use UN structures as the basis for working out his models. I think the first one was on a war conflict situation. And interestingly enough, it may have been the very first one that we did. But the other person that was linked with me to watch over, each group had 10 to 12 high school kids in it. So there were 2 adults appointed to each group. Frida Folan, Terry's wife, and I got this one group. Neither Frida nor I had ever been to New York. I'd been to Washington, but not to New York. So that was an interesting challenge, because we were going to have to lead these kids to an area that they'd never been to either. And we were given specific assignments. I forget what nation we were supposed to be, but we were at war. And we had to set up the interviews with the ambassadors of these countries and make those appointments, go to U.S. officials who are working for the UN and deal with them, get ready for the simulation, because the information that you collected in these interviews you had to use in the simulation.
Was this after the Vietnam War was over, or was this one?
No, I think the war was still going. That is, I think the U.S. was already withdrawing, but the war was still going.
It sounds like a fairly expensive project.
Yes, it is. It is an expensive project, but parents were willing to lay out the money for their kid to go, and that's how. And we got good deals with the buses, charter buses. So off we went. But yes, it was a very expensive project. We're talking probably $15,000 to $20,000 a trip.
Where did you stay while you were in New York?
In New York, there was an old. This was before China was accepted into the family of the United Nations, and they had their own mission, which was an old hotel about a block from the UN. The thing should have been torn down back in the 1800s. But the Chinese would let us use the building. So we stayed in that old hotel. The stairwell going up to the rooms that we had was just a metal frame. And it was a pain getting the kids to go up those stairs.
I had nightmares about this, taking the stairs.
So anyway, we did that for, well, I was finally fired. Terry was fired before I was. After the 1975 celebration of the United States 200 years.
76.
76. Those simulations had nothing to do with patriotism. I'll have to say that. It was a seminar that was highly critical of U.S. imperialism. The kids loved it. The simulation occurred in New York City in the Carnegie Building on the top floor when Carnegie had completely closed down for some reason, and they gave us the run of the whole building. And it was a war scenario, and we had the whole building to our access, every bit of it. And one group, who was one of the aggressor nations, figured out how the power in the building worked. And turned off all the power. And wouldn't turn it back on until they won. Anyway, the kids came back and they unfortunately told their parents what a wonderful time they had. And parents got really angry, and within a year or two Terry was out. Judy Ridlin, who was the daughter of Sam Ridlin, the guy who left the foundation because of the co-edification vote, was on regional staff. The Redlands are very conservative people, if not extreme, they so. And anyway, Terry's job, his portfolio went to Judy. And Judy then began to work, especially with the new bishop who came in probably around 77, 78, to get rid of me, which he did.
Jim, I may have missed something here. You got fired from what?
The region.
By whom? Okay.
from
Okay.
being on the youth ministry.
Okay, so from that particular youth ministry connection. So you and Terry both got fired at that. Okay.
The bishop had been in office for about 3 days when he called me and said he had received complaints that I had stolen money from University Place Christian Church and had created the foundation's endowment fund with it, and that all that money belonged to University Place Church. And he had to respond to that criticism, so he wanted a meeting with the board. So I set up a meeting for the board and with the executive committee. He wanted to have dinner with the executive committee first, so there wouldn't be any big surprise when he went to the board and demanded my dismissal.
So when he met with the executive committee, it was without you, the dinner?
So he went, Ken Crawford was the moderator of the board and the chair of the executive committee. So they went to dinner, and Larry presented his concern and said he had proof, and presented his credentials and whatever else he had. And I guess expected that the executive committee would agree with him. But Ken Crawford just really laced into him. Accused him of assuming that the foundation board, and especially the executive committee, would not know anything that I was doing. And since they knew everything that I was doing, they were in favor of everything I was doing. So if his charges were correct, he'd have to get rid of all of them. So then we went to the board meeting, and the same thing happened, with the exception that Larry was invited to leave town. So he left town.
What kind of stuff did he have that he thought was proof?
Stuff that Judy had given him, stuff that Sam had given him.
Things
Now,
that were manufactured?
Was this related to the war game simulation stuff, or it just happened to be around the same time?
I think it was, there was no doubt that the kids got a lot out of those programs, so they couldn't use that. What they were hearing was parents were saying, this is not a patriotic program.
But so the attempt to get you out of here was related to that?
Yes, I think so.
You think, okay.
I think so.
So they tried to trump up something that get
Yes.
rid of you that wasn't overtly political.
And the argument they gave was that we had received 1997, we had received our first two big endowment gifts. One was $180,000 and the other one was like $80,000. And these were people, or these bequests, the church interpreted as belonging to them.
So this goes back to the whole kind of the idea too that the money that went into building, yeah,
Same
was
argument, same argument. That stuff that I gave Aaron, that big box of stuff, has a file in it on some of that stuff.
okay.
It lays out that the most that any place ever gave for, that could be documented, to the foundation was $10,000. Where was I?
Well, the first two endowments came in.
So that was his argument.
But were those people church members?
No, they lived in, for whatever, had been students, like in the 20s, and had been active in the foundation.
And they'd given the money to the foundation.
The foundation,
It was
yeah.
clearly.
Yeah, yeah, look in those
Okay.
financial records in the green folders that I told you about.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining you had great relations with UPCC at this point.
It was deteriorating. It wasn't bad, but it was
I
deteriorating.
mean, did
Well,
other
if they're
people?
trying to get you fired,
But was it just those two people who were trying to get you fired? Did other people there agree with what they were doing?
There were other people who agreed.
Okay.
Yeah. And I say that because there were two consultations that the congregation held, that the region provided the material to do. One was in the early 70s, the other was in the late 70s. And in both cases, the foundation was not included in those consultations, it was just the congregation. And in both cases, it was clear that the findings showed that the church wanted to regain control of the foundation, and about 50% of the congregation would get rid of me. And it had been worked out mathematically, so you could see the percentages. It was like a poll.
Give you charts.
Yeah. So both of those consultations showed the same thing. In fact, Terry was the one who said after the second one came out, he says, "Jim, you need to be thinking about going somewhere else." And that's when I decided I'd go back to school and get the doctorate. So yeah, there was some heat that I was feeling.
So you went back when in 70?
70, I think it was 78 or 79 when I started.
Wait, so you have your doctorate? I did not know this. Interesting. So you were gone, like, permanently for a year or two, or you did both?
No, I just migrated to Indianapolis 3 days a week,
Okay. Well,
Monday, and Tuesday, and Wednesday.
We're near the end of the 70s. So the 70s have gone on. UCF has changed, has shifted, is by this point somewhat weakened. Page House is gone. The neighborhood ministries programs are being set up. The board is fairly supportive at this point of both.
More than that.
Okay, board's involved in the neighborhood ministry stuff as well as in Defense of You. What else are we missing? The neighborhood watch, didn't that?
Yes, that was all took off. Everything developed. The neighborhood watch thing grew and expanded. Finally, the university said, "This is something we want to do. Can we take it over as an Illini project?" So we turned it over to the university as an Illini project. So whistle stops began to show up all over.
is that how, like, the rape whistle stuff got started?
Yeah.
And then the van eventually died.
Well, it took a while.
Okay.
It was still going in the 80s.
Okay.
But it was getting dilapidated for sure.
can I, because I'm thinking, I was here during part of this time, and I never came in contact with the foundation anyway. But there were a lot of reasons for that. I'm just trying to connect, what I knew and why I didn't know certain things
I was over there and Jim was right here.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. We were living in Orchard Downs. I came here for grad school in '72 in the summer, and the part of the problem that I think, in terms of my not being connected with what's going on here, well, the anti-religious thing probably, and I didn't want to even think about anything having to do with any religious group at all. I was given a task from the Socialist Workers Party to come down here and be the organizer for the chapter of the Young Socialist Alliance on campus, which was basically two people who were both gay, who were basically organizing only around that one issue and not doing anything. And this was in '72, not doing anything around war and all that kind of stuff. So I was trying to do the grad school thing plus the YSA organizing thing, which I wasn't telling my wife about because she didn't like the political activity that I had been involved in. So I had to do that underground. And we would bring in people from YSA to campus to do stuff. Particularly, I remember in '73 we were organizing around the October War stuff. We're having shouting matches with Fred Gottheil out on the south patio because we were pro-Palestine and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so
Is he
the economics guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
So
teaches like 102.
we would bring people in from out of town and look for places to put people up. And I didn't even know about the foundation. We would put them up at the Lutheran church across the street from Lincoln Hall and stuff like that. And so, my focus was such that probably anything north of campus I didn't really know about. We didn't really have a connection with. And I'm just saying this just to kind of.
I think that's valid because our focus shifted just to the 7 square blocks of our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And gradually it expanded, but it never went south of Green Street.
Remember the Shackelford Institute?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I worked
remember
with
the shouting on this patio.
with what in terms of Shackelford.
Yeah.
Because the Shackelford Institute was I understood it as being basically black community organizing, young people in black. It was a link between black students on campus and the campus community, and the North Campus community. And it was basically organized as an anti-drug thing. No hope with dope, I remember, was the back of the T-shirt that they had. And so I didn't know if there was any connection with Shackelford people that in the neighborhood thing that you were doing, or of course this was '75 at this point.
No.
Okay.
We were pretty much focused on the neighborhood and what its people wanted to do. For example, there was a guy up in Chicago, a former Roman Catholic priest, who was living on the south side working with black kids who had run away from home, basically, or whose parents had disappeared. And somehow he had gotten hold of a farm over in Michigan, an orchard. So one of the ways the food co-op got its fruit was that we would go to Chicago every weekend, go out to his farm and pick the peaches and the apples or whatever else was coming due and bring it back. And we wouldn't have done that if there hadn't been the need for fruit.
Right.
So our attention, was not only on the north side of campus, but it was far north.
So what was UCF doing at this point? I mean, there must not have been as much energy put into it if you had time for this other stuff.
Well, UCF was collapsing, but we were still in a cooperative mode. So while the Neighborhood Service Ministry, we assumed the initiative for that, it was still being done as UCF.
Mm.
And the other units that were still part of it were doing their thing, but also as UCF. For example, after Howard Doffenbaugh left us, we hired Linda Kuhn, who developed the Baker Fund Board program for womanist theology. And she created the local witch program. They would hold their meetings out in the Garth during the summertime, and in the winter, they would meet over at Wesley. I was elected to the Wesley Baker Fund Board, the first male who ever served on the Baker Fund Board other than Mr. Baker. And once the ERA struggles got started, we plugged into that and formed our own religious committee for the ERA. I went to the Illinois Conference of Churches, and in their governmental concerns unit, developed a Illinois religious committee for the ERA.
Now, what year was that then?
Oh, well, the ERA was passed by
Came
the
out in
House and
72.
the Senate in 72,
Yeah.
so 72, 73. We went all over the state for the Illinois Conference of Churches on that issue, especially in the main towns in the south and then on the south side of Chicago. Those were the two areas I worked. Locally, we worked with NOW, the grassroots group of second-class citizens. We held ERA meetings in all of the churches that were open to that, largely the Methodist.
And that went on for quite a few years. That was going
Yeah,
into
that went
the.
on the whole time until it was defeated.
And this was something wasn't our lovely mayor and Urbana involved with? Laurel Pressing?
Yeah, yeah.
The Mary Lee Sargent was involved.
Mary Lee Sargent was
She was
the
the head of
leader.
the grassroots group. When was it defeated? What was it?
82. They had 10 years to
10 years.
to get it across. They had that by that point they had states pulling out who had voted for it and were now reversing themselves.
And it continued, that program continued for another 2 years because the women were so angry at its defeat in Illinois, they wanted to put an end to the political career of at least Virgil Wyckoff, who was our representative in the state senate. And he lost the election. So-
Bernice Carroll, who was a professor of political science here, she worked really closely with Mary Lee Sargent and all this.
Yeah.
They chained themselves to the gates in Springfield and stuff.
Blood.
And we
Blood
also,
too.
and we also
Probably.
worked,
Yeah, no, they
Bernice
did. They did.
Bernice was the anarchist in the political science
Yeah.
department.
we also worked with Ellen Ferber to get the women's study program going. So all of
I
that,
can know that name from somewhere else.
so all of that grew out of that effort.
And the Baker Board thing still exists over at Wesley, right?
Yeah.
So UCF was doing ERA stuff then too.
No,
No.
well, Linda was able to, no, I have to say, when she resigned, she really gave a heated evaluation of the UCF board and its lack of support for what she had been doing.
But so IDF was doing that, but wait, what's the together separate if we
Yeah,
can't
well,
do it?
It was falling apart.
Since we could do it separately, we didn't have to do it together.
That's right. That's
So
right.
when would you say UCF basically just
This
disappeared?
died in May of 1980.
1980.
But near the end, it was basically just IDF in one other place, right? Still. Or?
Community United Church.
Yeah.
The Methodists delivered an ultimatum that they were going to leave. They gave us 1 month to respond courteously to their ultimatum. And we weren't able to satisfy the conditions that they put down. So they left. And that just left the UCCs and IDF.
Had funding pretty much dried up at this point too, and was the building gone, or was this still?
Yeah. And the place on Pennsylvania and Lincoln was gone, yeah.
So UCF was headquartered here.
That was the headquartered here.
Did that go? Did the Pennsylvania thing go away because there was no money, or because people started pulling out?
We had to get rid of it, yeah.
They sold
Well,
it.
the neighbors were complaining. We developed a home there for runaway high school kids. And Mr. and Mrs. Alexander, who owned the property right next door to us, put up a big stink about it, and they were very powerful people politically. And so they were gonna bring suit against us, and they would have probably won that suit.
In terms of like housing codes and stuff like that. Probably.
Yeah. So we sold it. The last last thing UCF was doing was a study of the militarization of higher education here at the U of I. After Linda left, Ron Martin Adkins was hired, and he was a Mennonite and was a pacifist, and so he wanted to do something that would stay in that tradition. So the World Student Christian Federation was trying to get back in the United States at that time, and they were issuing grants for studies of militarization of higher ed. So we applied, we got a grant, and we started doing that study. It went for 3 years, beginning with '78, and 1 year after UCF was dead.
Now, where was the office at for UCF?
It was right next to mine downstairs.
In the PRC office, huh? So, how was there still funding? Who was funding UCF at this point to actually hire people to be?
UMHE,
Okay.
basically,
Okay.
and IDF and UCC.
Okay.
I think we were putting $5,000 or $6,000 into the pot.
So there was one staffer, but there had been more staffers at a
Oh,
different
yeah.
point, earlier point, right?
Right.
So if we were putting in money, were we getting anything out of it at that point?
Insofar as we were all still operating under the rubric of UCF, yes, we were. UCF was the only ecumenical body that lasted for 20 years in Champaign, Urbana. There's never been another one last that long. Part of the difficulty was that the university got ticked off at us because of the position we took on lots of different issues, and they didn't feel like they could talk to the religious community except to the Religious Workers Association. The Religious Workers Association has no voice at all because it's made up of individual religious who are workers. And
So we're not talking about like ICWJ.
well, it doesn't do anything. Individuals who might want to do something are free to do whatever they want to do, but RWA doesn't do anything.
Okay.
And the university loves that, because then it can say, get this message out to the religious community, and RWA will do that. But there's no religious body in town that can say, we want the university to get this message, so there's no channel back. But UCF was that channel. So it was a loss to lose UCF. Even when it was collapsing, it was still making an impact. Other things that we were doing, because the international affairs seminars worked so good, at high school kids, I thought, okay, let's do a global awareness seminar for the campus. So we started doing global awareness seminars. They dealt with issues that were current in the political realm. For example, the year, I never can get these dates right. When did we recognize China? The Nixon initiative?
72.
72.
Well, that's when Nixon went. We didn't recognize China until '79.
Okay. So it would have been '78 when we did the Global Awareness Seminar on China.
So the Global Awareness Seminar started in the late 70s.
Yeah, China was our second one. The first one was South Africa,
Okay.
which focused on apartheid and economic issues. That one lasted 6 weeks. The China thing lasted 3 days.
Oh, these weren't just one-off speaker events.
We brought it. We had a lot. We had money coming in from the endowments, so we were putting $5,000 of income into the program, and we were getting $5,000 from the Colvin Fund at Uniplace. So we had $10,000 to put these things on.
5,000 a year from Colvin.
So we were
Okay.
able to bring in the very best people for these conferences.
The China one, I'm curious about the China one in '78 because I was here, and so
Yeah, well, I was thinking that too when you brought it up.
I was trying to think of when and who would have been involved in that?
I'd have to get out that file,
Okay.
but there were like 5 or 6
Where was it held?
here.
It was held here. Okay.
All of them were held here.
Okay.
We held one on the, I forget what the issue was, but the conflict between East and West Germany. And we brought in a guy, Robert Ludwig, I think is his last name. Ludwig, who was part of the staff of the Geneva World Council of Churches, and with special responsibilities for the World Student Christian Federation. The WSCF was clearly a Marxist organization. That is, its ideology was Marxist. And he represented that very well. Gave 3 lectures, one of which took place in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, and inducted me into the Taizé community. This was the cross that he gave me, or the
I was
dove
always gonna ask you
that he
about
gave
that.
me.
What community? Can you spell that?
Taizé, T-A-I-Z-E, Taizé, France. Well, that's when we lost the $5,000 from Calvin Fund. The congregation was not going to put up with funding a Marxist.
Did we lose it completely?
We sure did.
Just one success after another. Jim.
One
Well, we
success
somehow
after another.
got back 1,200.
That was many years later.
Yeah.
Wait, so you have to explain the Taizé community thing a little bit more.
Brother Roger was at Iona Monastery in Scotland, and after World War II, he and a bunch of other religious types moved to Taizé, France, for the purpose of helping rebuild villages and towns that had been bombed, and to help people recover from the war. They formed their own monastic order. They're neither Protestant nor Catholic. And they now have a house in Turkey and one in Australia. You go through the initiate period, and then you have to go someplace in the world to start a mission on your own, of your own creation. And you fund it however you can, and you stay there until it's time to die. And then you come back to Taizé.
So you didn't do this, you just got the...
No, I'm just an honorary member.
Okay, I was just
But
saying.
but only bona fide Taizéans can have this particular medallion.
And what's the medallion mean?
It can mean a cross or it can mean a dove.
I always thought it was a dove.
Oh.
I always thought it was a dove.
I
That's
saw
how
it
I've
as
always...
both.
It's like one of
Okay.
those.
I saw it as a
W cross?
yeah, well, a cross-shaped
Crossy dove.
But they propose themselves to be engaged in prophetic ministry, so that's how I got it.
Yeah, I always thought it was like a liberation theology version of a.
That's
Okay.
cross.
Well, I saw the connection when I first saw Jim. I can't say met him, because when I first saw Jim, when I came back here in '85 as a visiting prop, and I used to go to PACA meetings, I'm just jumping ahead, but this guy would show up at these meetings, and he was wearing this thing that looked like a cross, but it wasn't a cross. And it was always curious.
In the next 5 minutes, we need to take a break.
Already.
It doesn't mean we have time, but I just...
Yeah.
Another thing that I got involved in, the foundation did, because I was a member of the Illinois Conference of Churches Governmental Concerns Consortium, I volunteered to be on the prison reform group. So we got into prison reform work, drafting legislation, lobbying for it, going to prisons, especially Marion, at least that's where I went, and trying to get conditions for prisoners improved. Part of that was because of one of the kids in the International Affairs Seminar, Brad Ridden, whose home was in St. Joe. Came from a very poor family. And Brad was, he was not the ideal child, I guess, and so his parents kicked him out. And he was living on the street. And I don't know if any of you remember Huey's. Joe might remember Huey's.
I remember Huey's.
Yeah.
They sold a bunch of junk. And
That's where the Blockbuster in Urbana is now. That whole corner was.
Used to shop there all the time.
And they had like a little like rednecky kind of guy was Huey, like a little
Yeah. It was kind of like a
Big Lots. It's
Like
kind of like
Big
a Big
Lots,
Lots.
yeah.
Lots.
Basically Big
Except
Lots,
it
yeah.
was a step lower than Big
Oh.
You can still find thrift stores with Huey's T-shirts. They
But
had
it was the
like,
only
shirts.
place in town like that, so, you know, a lot of people who didn't have a lot of money used to go there and
Right.
shop.
Anyway, Brad, for whatever his reasons were, broke in there one night and stole a television set worth $55, which was $5 over the limit
Yeah.
for a felony. So it was not a misdemeanor. And unfortunately, he left his fingerprints and lots of other things, so he got caught. And was convicted and was sent off to Cook County Jail. So I worked with him while he was in there for 3 years for a $55 theft.
And why was he sent to Cook County?
I have no idea. We finally convinced the warden to let him do an extension course with Bradley University, and so while he was in prison, he got 2 years of college work done, and then when he got out, he came here, got his degree in criminal justice,
Hmm.
and lives someplace over in Missouri now. So that was a part of one of the spin-offs of the prison reform thing.
So the global awareness seminars. So after the Calvin Fund pulled it, was that the end of them?
We did one more,
Okay.
but we only had our $5,000, so it was still a good seminar.
Didn't you do one with Iamba at some point?
Yeah, that was the first one, South Africa.
Oh, okay. Iamba did South Africa.
Yeah, that was the most extensive one. You turn Iamba loose on something, and you're going to get more than you counted on.
So it was out of that global awareness seminar? Is that when the IDF board, decided to divest?
We began to get into the divestment issue.
Or was that later? That was in the 80s.
Probably, well, it took us a while, about 1977 or 78, somewhere in there. Jack Austin, who was one of my professors, had been elevated to the Division of Overseas Ministries with special responsibility for political prisoners. And one of the first, besides Mandela, Biko,
Mm-hmm.
who was killed in prison.
Right around that time. Biko would've been killed.
Jack had went to see him, and they let him see him, but they let him see him while they were in the process of killing him. So Jack came back and shared that information with us and urged us to divest. That was the only thing he could think of a church group in the U.S. could do. So that started the debate.
And was that before or after you had the 6-week class on it in South Africa?
That was before. Or no, after South Africa. After South Africa. So I think it was like 80 or 81 before the board voted to divest. And so we did, and we made a killing. We made money by divesting. And that gave us the voice to talk to the why about divesting. You won't lose money. We got to testify before the board of trustees. You won't lose money.
Yeah, that helped a lot. No, but I mean, IDF doing that, that was still on the early edge of
Yeah.
divestment stuff happening.
Yeah, it was.
Well, let's take a break at divestment
All right.
and come back.
It's
Because I got-
divest.
Yes.
Hey Joe, has Don got a hold?
More involved in the, the Watergate stuff. Most of our stuff was struggles with other political groups. Revolutionary Student Brigade particularly,
Yeah.
because they were fairly strong on campus at that point. And we used to set up tables at the Union
How much longer are we going for?
next to each other and stuff.
Why is that?
Well, I haven't peed yet because I have to do that stuff.
Go pee.
Okay. Well, I was supposed to be like 20 minutes.
We'd have these, tables next to each other in the Union. And so it'd be arguments between
Right, right.
YSA and RSB and all this bullshit and stuff.
Well, I mean, it sounds like that there was a shift made in what IDF and UCF was doing from
You were doing more stuff on
from more
community stuff.
anti-war type stuff to moving more into the neighborhood type
And we
stuff.
had no community connections. I mean, we were basically on this big issue stuff, so it was all, the closest thing was was working with Shackelford people, again, one-on-one,
Right.
because the
Weren't
Shackelford.
they kind of funky? I mean, I thought I
They were
remember hearing
connected with
things.
Venceremus Brigade, at least the
Oh,
people
really?
I knew. Yeah,
Oh.
the people I knew were,
I thought I remember hearing negative things about them. I thought.
Well, they were kind of like, it was a community group as much as I could tell. But, the guy I knew was a poli-sci student who had been on Venceremus Brigade, and I knew, and I connected with him through
Was he
Belden.
white
and-
or was he?
Right.
Huh?
Was he white?
No, African American.
Okay.
And he was in,
What was his name?
he was probably, I don't remember his name. He was probably in the same class that, we were in a socialist political theory class that was divided. Belden Fields took one half of the class who wanted to do contemporary Marxist stuff and, contemporary, so, and I went in that wing. The other wing went with Bernice Carroll, who wanted to do more feminist socialist theory and anarchism, because that's where Bernice was.
Right.
And then every once in a while, we would come together as a group, okay? And so you'd have the Belden class, who was into basically the, like, organizational issues and structural issues, differences between groups and stuff. And then you'd have Bernice's class, which was more theoretical, and, the hardcore anarchist stuff. And I think this guy might have been in that class at that time. That was in '73. That was where I first met him. And then eventually, the Shackelford people were pretty visible on campus, with their t-shirts and stuff. And they used to do stuff with the local community. And so that was my only connection with that. And so a lot of my focus was on trying to get through grad school and
Sure.
and also doing the political stuff. And I stopped doing the political stuff probably in '75 because I had to get serious about prelims and all that kind of stuff. And so I basically I still have a copy of this letter. I wrote this formal resignation letter to the YSA about, not that I was
Yeah.
cutting myself off politically, it's just that I couldn't do the work anymore. And so that's when I stopped the structured connection with them, and became more a student at that point, doing summer jobs that were just kind of, supporting us, because when I wasn't a TA.
Well, during that period, I was losing, largely because of the Kent State and Jackson State fiascos. I was losing I was losing a lot of confidence in the political process. So I wasn't, the only thing that I was doing politically was whatever Harry Tebow would call and say, do this, I'll do it. I was doing it for Harry more than for the Democratic Party, but I'd pretty much decided that after Nixon's resignation and Ford's pardoning, the rest of the country seemed to breathe a sigh of relief over that. But I thought, my God, nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed. So, so I probably wasn't working in those circles either, in those circles that you
Yeah.
were.
Well, going back to where we kind of left off, I don't know if there's anything else to talk about with well, I guess the board divestment thing led me to a couple things I wanted to think of. And I know in each of these we're trying to look at the different areas of the foundation. So things we haven't touched on were, I know there was a uprising type thing happening, what that was. And then also a smaller internal thing, because I know we were giving money to UCF, the board was getting endowments, but what kind of admin stuff? I mean, what other structure was there? Were you the only staff at this point? Was there anybody else? Church was still doing a lot of the support work. Maybe that one would be easier. Maybe move into like the uprising.
Well, we had a church mouse. That was a position. Person on the 3rd floor who took care of locking up and unlocking the building. And he was paid his space up there. We paid our own custodian. And at the beginning of the 70s, we had 2 custodians that we paid. Then we had to cut back to 1. And then later we had to drop that altogether, and Uniplace took over the custodian stuff. But yes, I was the only staff person up until we created the campus ministry associates.
No, I thought that. No, but I thought there was.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, Judy Brown fell.
Okay.
Jessup, who did the. That's something I left out. The ministry to aging folk.
Yeah, that was in the 70s, though, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about that, I guess.
Well, before she came on, Martha Trescott. We hired Martha Trescott. And Martha was into the early stages of the feminist movement here on campus. So she was one of the more radical women. She was also working on her PhD thesis. So she needed money. So we were able to give her a small stipend, and she worked with Linda Kuhn, and she also worked with the food co-op.
And what year was that?
So it would have been like 73, 74.
So was that the first
75.
other staff person besides you?
Yeah, yeah. Then after she left, she had already gone through 3 marriages at that point, and she got married again, and that one blew up, and she was a bastard.
Well, the first 3 didn't give her a clue that the 4th one might not work as well.
Yeah, I don't know what was wrong with my score, but she just kept, and she finally married a 5th guy. And then she divorced him and became an Episcopal priest. So there's...
Sounds like that should have been decided maybe a little earlier.
Maybe after number 2, maybe. So what was her position? She was just like kind of a part-time
Yeah.
associate.
Right.
And then...
Then Judy was hired against my wishes, and some other board members, but she was hired as a program coordinator. Her job was to, because we had so many programs going, she was going to try to create some kind of scheduling so that all these activities could be coordinated. But she was really interested in starting a ministry to aging people.
Now, was she a disciple, or was she
No,
just...
no, at that point in time.
And her office was the one that's in the general meeting room now in the corner,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. What was she at that time? She was a member of the Community United Church, I believe.
But the board decided they wanted somebody to help out with programming.
Yeah, right.
And this was
She
what year?
got-
What
she
year was
got-
this?
It was in probably the
Late 70s.
fall or the spring after Martha left.
So it was mid 70s.
Yeah. Because we didn't have the food co-op at that point when
Okay.
she came on. Martha got the job because she cried during the interview, and there were board members who...
But Martha was the previous one, though.
I mean, Judy.
She cried during the interview?
She cried during the interview. Because she wanted a job so bad, and this was just what she wanted. And she just broke down in tears during the interview. And a bunch of people thought, hey, this is really great. We got somebody who's really passionate. She would have this
But you were opposed to the position. You weren't even just opposed to her, right?
No, I was opposed to her. I wasn't
Okay.
opposed to the position.
Okay. And was it full-time?
I thought this was not a good reason for hiring somebody.
That's a very good point.
Was it full-time?
But nobody would listen to me. Yes, it was full-time. Warren Royer was the only other one on the board who
Warren.
agreed with me. But
Principal at Uni High.
Yeah, he was superintendent at that time, or principal, or whatever the title is.
Yeah.
So she started her ministry with aging, which was not the job description. So So gradually, board members began to figure this out, that, you know, she was using the position for her own purposes. And
So she wasn't doing the work she was hired for?
yeah, she was
her
doing
own-
it.
Oh,
She
okay.
was doing it, but she was doing it because it enabled her to do this other thing. So we had one board member who, during a board meeting, brought this to the surface, and the board wasn't ready to act. And so he resigned on the spot and left. That got everybody's attention.
And he brought what, that she was doing the term agenda, not,
Yeah, and that we were paying her for something that we didn't hire her for. So Ben Straitman, who was moderator, and I got together and we said, we got to deal with this, or we're gonna lose more board members, because several others were beginning to make noises. And so we put together a package that she couldn't refuse and offered it to her. And it took her about 3 months to decide that, yeah, it was a good deal. And so she left.
and what year was that she left? And she was around for a couple of years.
80, 83, 80.
Oh, so she was around for a long time?
Yeah,
So more than 5 years?
yeah.
Like 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah, she had an article in the newspaper not too long ago. Included her.
Well, I knew her daughter. I used to run with her daughter
Mhm.
the first couple of years I was down here. But that would be right after she was, because I think it was recent that she had been here.
So then she went over to McKinley and hassled them for a few years. She's now a member of the Sinai Temple and converting to Judaism.
Wow.
So she was around. So then, so what about the uprising stuff? What was, it was called something else at that point, right?
Well, yeah, we call it Table Fellowship in the 70s. We had a meal together, and then we would do Bible studies. I had taken several courses with George Pixley, who was a Baptist missionary in Nicaragua and was a part of the revolutionary group there. And he read the Bible in interesting ways that are not typical of North America. So I thought, okay, I can spread this a little bit. So that's what we did. Somewhere along that time, these were on, they took place on Sunday night or Wednesday night or Thursday night. It kind of floated around. Sometimes they were here, sometimes they were at other people's houses. About that time, or somewhere in there, a guy named Conga Bokamba and Conga Bokimbia showed up. He was from Zaire, and he was fleeing from the secret police of Zaire because he had opposed Mobutu, the president of Zaire. And Mobutu had promised to kill him, which he was good at doing, killing people. So Conga came to Champaign-Urbana. I do know. He surfaced in Chicago at Don McCart's church. And Don didn't want to deal with him, I guess, so he called me and said, would you be interested in meeting this person? He's got a lot to say about Zaire.
And what year was this? Late 70s?
I'd say 79, 80, 81. Now, Yamba knew Nkanga because they came from the same clan. And they were also members of the same clan as Mobutu, so that they had this interrelationship. Yamba and Nkanga had opposed Mobutu. That's why Yamba is here in the States. And that was why Nkanga was here in the States. So Yamba said, yeah, let's bring him down and hear what he's got to say. So we brought him down. And back in the 60s, there was also an African here, a Zairean, whose name was Lokaluthu. And Lokaluthu got his PhD and then went to Zaire and became head of the secret police. So, and Congo was sharing this information, and Yamba brought up the point about Lokaluthu. Apparently, Zaire at that time kept tabs on all Zaireans in the United States, and it was the secret police's job to keep tabs on everybody. So, and Congo then was saying, you know, this is what's happened to me, and they're after me, and I need a place to hide out. So we agreed, me and the board agreed to put him on the third floor, in one of the rooms up there, and he could stay there.
Now, the third floor was mostly vacant except for
Yeah,
the church mouse, right?
Except for the church mouse. We still had a church mouse. But Congo stayed in the room right next to McBride Hall. So he stayed with us for 3 years. Every year, Lokaluthu would show up, Secret Service guy. And want to know if we'd seen Congo. Well, no, Lokaluthu we hadn't
Oh,
seen.
so he was still in this country?
No,
He would just
He'd
travel
fly
over?
back,
He would
yeah.
travel
Oh,
over.
okay, okay.
Uh,
So I was thinking, Taiwan was doing the same thing to students from Taiwan as well.
So we hid him out for a long time. Now that got us in trouble with Indianapolis. They knew that we had said, yeah, come on down from Chicago. But that's all they knew. But they knew he was still around here.
Was he in the country legally?
Yes. So one day I got a phone call from the guy who was head of Division of Overseas Ministries and come over and see me. So I went over to see him and he raked me over the coals for entertaining the idea of Congo might be useful in the States. We got to get him out of here. Do you know where he is? No, I don't know where he is. So I became pretty good at lying about it, Congo. He finally, when we got into sanctuary, this created a problem because one guy from Zaire and a group of people from Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala didn't seem like a wise mix. So we arranged for Congo to find a place in Nashville. And so, and then we also arranged to get his wife here. We had to bribe some people in Zaire to do that. DCAS still raised $5,000 for the bribe, and then I had to deliver it.
I remember D.
So we got his wife here, and then she moved to Nashville. They hid out there for a long time. Somehow he got into Vanderbilt and finished up his doctorate and got a job at a small college somewhere in the United States. He is still being searched.
But you don't know where he's at.
No, I don't. I have deliberately sought not to know that.
Well, I want
So-
to save sanctuary stuff for the next one because it was moving to the 80s
Right.
for the next one.
There are two other things to bring up.
Sure.
One is the nuclear freeze thing.
Hmm.
We helped create what was known as the Illinois Prairie Alliance. Greg Slocum, who was a student and on the board, became the president of that. It was a small group. But when Ronald Reagan came to Eureka College to give his first policy statement on the nuclear arms race, we decided we would go and protest his presence at the graduation of the Eureka College class, where he was the graduation speaker. So there were 20 to 25 of us who went. And the Secret Service was magnificent. We parked our car, we parked the van about a mile away from the campus and hiked in. And as we were going up onto the main part of the campus, in front of the administration building, we passed a tree. A great big tree. And we heard this voice, "They're passing us now." There was a person inside this tree. It was a hollow tree. It was
It was literally
It was hollow
inside.
Yeah,
That's
and he
like-
was inside this damn tree. We walked into about another 200 yards, and the state cops were all lined up in 2 rows, and we had to walk between them. And they herded us right out to the parking lot outside the gymnasium where the celebration was going on with Reagan. And they made us stand in the bumper space in the center of the parking lot. And then they pulled all the buses right up against one another, completely circled us with these buses. And we stood there for
You're a
about
pretty dangerous group.
3
obviously.
hours, I guess, while he gave his speech.
This was after he was president already?
This was his president, and they had Secret Service people up on the buildings, and they watched us through their telescopes on their rifles for a long time. We began to wave at them, and finally they dropped their rifles and began to wave back.
Was this after the assassination attempt on him?
No, this was before.
Before that? So this is like really early in,
Mhm.
okay.
So,
But this-
that was that got a lot of press on what the Illinois Prairie Alliance was able to do.
But was that a St. Freeze chapter?
No.
No, is that
They were
before
not in
St.
St. Freeze. St. Freeze was in for, at least here, they did not want to engage in any kind of protests that might lead to violence.
Hmm.
So they were more into educational kinds of projects.
Because the St. Freeze was pretty big here, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Eventually.
It was much bigger than Illinois
Yeah.
Prairie Alliance.
But that was later in the 80s, I think.
Okay.
By the time they grew. Because at the beginning of Nixon's time here, I was still in Australia, and the worldwide nuclear disarmament movement.
You mean
was-
Reagan's time?
Or Reagan's time, sorry. And the worldwide nuclear disarmament movement was just beginning to develop at the
Mhm.
early part of his time.
Right.
So it was really in the mid-80s where
Mhm.
a lot of those groups began to get,
Mhm.
massive demonstrations that you'd get huge people. And then when I came here in '85, the nuclear freeze folks were housed in the Y, as I recall, I think.
Mhm. Right. The Prairie Alliance was a very small group, but they were willing to do things that might get them in trouble. Chuck Seeger can tell you more about it. He was a member of it.
And IDF's connection was that it had some members in it, and
Well, most of the members came from here.
and was it just focused on nuclear free stuff, or was it
No,
multi-issue?
it was opposing not only the nuclear arms race, but also the political connections that went into that. Greg got interested in the foundation, I think, because of the study on the militarization of higher education. So he was interested in seeing how things like the coordinated science lab or the psych lab tied into the nuclear arms race. So he was a big help in pulling some of that data together. The last thing was an interesting project. It was a gleaning project, and it ran for 3 years, 74, 75, 76. And it was a coalition of Empty Tomb, IDF, the U.S. Air Force up at Chanute, and RWA.
What exactly?
Well, despite all of the talk about how good our agricultural machinery is, and it is very efficient when you're on level ground and you're doing harvesting of corn. It gets nearly all the corn. But if you're in rolling territory, it's another matter. It'll leave anywhere from 30 to 35% of the corn. Now, Empty Tomb had a relationship with Recife, Brazil, probably created by Father Pfeiffer when he was here. and they were sending food stuff to Recife, Brazil, to the poor folk in that parish.
Really?
I found out about the farm machinery by talking to people in agriculture, and thought, well, Empty Tomb, would you be interested in sending a trainload of corn to Recife? And they said yes. So then all kinds of logistical things came up. We needed buses to carry people to the fields. We needed gasoline for the bus tanks. We needed farmers' permission to go into their fields after they had harvested to do the gleaning. So this took quite a while to pull all that stuff together, but we finally got it together and we did gleaning projects.
Wait, how did Chanute fit into this?
They provided the buses
Oh,
and the
okay.
gasoline.
Wow.
Okay.
How did that happen? That's we
Well-
talk about strange bedfellows. Like,
I remembered some words of my brother-in-law who said, when you deal with military, you have to deal with them just like they would deal with any of their soldiers. So I thought, okay, I'll just call the commandant. So I called the commandant, and in my most forceful voice brought up the project. And sounds like a good deal for me. I've got all these airmen and they're not doing anything. This will get them out of their barracks. And, will you supply the buses and the gas? Well, yes. So we had all the buses, we had all the gas we could use. We had, 50 to 100 airmen. We had a bunch of students. And we had lots of fields to go glean. So it was a matter of scheduling. This group goes over there, that group goes over here, and then come back. And we take the corn to the granaries. And so we were sending actually 2 train car loads of corn to Recife, Brazil for those 3 years.
mhm.
So that was our charity work, I guess.
Was there any conflict between IDF and MP2
No.
in terms of, because of my understanding of their political,
They're very conservative folk.
yes, that was what I was trying to say.
But when it comes to sending food to different places in the world, they're for
They
it.
were, okay. Very
And
interesting.
John and Sylvia at that particular time had not achieved their international reputation. So John now struts around in a banker suit, whereas then he had a beard that went down to his belt, and hair that went down to his ass, and wore torn up clothes. So he was one of the guys who protested the war back in the 60s.
So I'm still wondering how you, I mean, you say how you talked to the commandant on the phone at Chanute, but I mean, how does Chanute get involved in this? I mean, obviously it's a public relations thing from their
I just called
side.
the commandant. I don't know what his
No, but I'm
problem
just
was.
saying, yeah, so this is, from their perspective, this is a good public relations thing for us to do. We're not doing anything right now, there's no war going, well, this is tail end of the Vietnam War, right? So there's probably not a lot of activity on the base.
Well, they were, the one thing that the commandant said was that, we got these people, they need to be doing something on Saturdays. So I gathered that meant that there was some problem with discipline on Saturdays.
Well, that leads to my, the connection I'm making is, because inside the military, I don't know if you've gotten into that book that I gave you,
Mhm.
but the idea that there was so much going on inside the military in terms of just keeping people busy,
Mhm.
that this probably fit.
Yeah.
That's like
Fit
us
their
in the
requirements.
CMAs.
Say what?
But
Us in the CMAs, the Campus Ministry Associates.
You have to keep them busy?
Yeah. We spend so much time trying to find stuff for them to do.
How about some gleaning some corn?
Of course, the buses and the gasoline were quite an expense for Chanute to expend on this.
Yeah, but I'm guessing their
So-
budget probably had something where they could.
Well, I'm sure their
say it's
budget covered
community relations. kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. But it was a neat project, and it brought weird people together
Yeah.
for a
I've
3-year
never heard
period.
of weirder
That's
bedfellows.
Well, do we have any questions from any of us or anything we want to end with?
I think we've covered.
Jim, can you dig out some photos for from the 70s to bring for the next one? Because
Well,
Yeah,
if you
I've
get
got-
them to me sooner, I can scan them.
Yeah, I've got, Dolores and I've been going through that stuff, so I'm sure that we've got, I know that we've got the gleaning project stuff. and
Not just that, but any of the
there-
stuff.
There are some of
The neighborhood
roofing
services,
columns,
like the van, pictures of the van, and
I'd be curious,
Yeah.
just from a personal perspective, of the China seminar that you did, the global seminar, just, because
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out,
Well, there's
because at that time,
a file on each international affairs seminar in those filing cabinets.
I
Okay.
was covered, so.
I can try to.
Because I'm just curious,
Dig up some
'cause
stuff.
And there should be photographs there too.
I may have actually attended it, or maybe I did, I don't know. I remember attending something at Community United Church. I think it was Community United Church sometime around this time, that had to do with China, and they brought in, can't remember, this one guy who had written a book, a religious book relating to China, and, you know, I remember attending that, but I just don't.
We didn't use any religious books,
It wasn't a religious book, what's the guy's name? Raymond Whitehead, I think was his name.
Whitehead was one of the guys we brought.
Well, so it might have been connected, and it might have been here, and maybe I'm.
Yeah, he was here, he
Yeah.
went over there.
Yeah,
There was a guy from, well, there was one person that we brought from China, we flew him in.
okay.
And one from Canada,
Okay.
and I think one.
I remember attending a thing with Whitehead, because he was, you know, he had, and this is in that late '70s period where everybody's excited about the opening up of China and stuff like that. And,
We were able to get some of these people through the World Council of Churches,
Uh-huh.
because what was never made public was that Kissinger did not create that opening, but it was the Asian desk of the World Council of Churches that created that opening. And if it hadn't been for that desk, Kissinger would not have been given permission to go.
yeah, well, there's a lot of stuff coming out about Kissinger now. It's undermining his self-importance.
Well, that's good. That's what we need.
Yeah,
All right.
recent thing came out last week was, there's documents now that Kissinger and Nixon, basically told the Chinese that they could accept a communist Vietnam. They didn't really care. They just
Just
wanted
wait
to
a
get
while.
out.
Just wait, but
Yeah,
just wait a
put it
while.
off. Yeah, just wait a little bit. And so just let us get the hell out, and then you guys can have it.
All right, well, should we end on that?
Yeah.